She betrayed her husband in the moment the heavy, automated blackout blinds of the master suite hissed shut, cutting off the dying light of the golden hour and severing the visual link to the outside world, and I will never forget the way the shadows instantly swallowed the professional distance between us, turning a business transaction into a dangerous conspiracy. It wasn't just a betrayal of her vows. It was a calculated demolition of the hierarchy that was supposed to keep me, a 24-year-old freelance photographer with $80 in his bank account, invisible to a woman like Victoria. She was the queen of high-end real estate, a woman who sold lifestyles most people only saw in movies, and her husband was the ruthless developer who built them. I was just the guy hired to make the property look good before the open house. But standing there in the dim, amber light of that $10 million bedroom, I realized I wasn't there to capture the architecture. I was there because she was bored, hungry, and used to taking exactly what she wanted, regardless of the price tag or the ring on her finger. To understand the insanity of what happened, you have to understand the glass box. That's what the neighbors called the property. It was a modernist architectural marvel perched on the edge of a cliff, composed almost entirely of floor-to-ceiling windows. It was designed to be transparent, to let the world see in, and let the owners look down on everyone else. The pressure was already suffocating before Victoria even arrived. I had been setting up my gear since 4 p.m., trying to catch the golden hour, that fleeting window of time when the sunlight hits the glass just right and makes the whole house look like a jewel. This gig was supposed to be my big break. If I impressed Victoria, I'd get the contract for her entire firm's portfolio. If I screwed it up, I was back to shooting studio apartments for rent. When her Porsche Cayenne screeched into the driveway, my stomach dropped. She stepped out, looking immaculate in a tailored navy suit that cost more than my car, checking her watch with a scowl. She didn't say hello. She just walked past me, threw her keys onto the marble kitchen island, and said, "We have 30 minutes before the sun dies, Jason. Don't waste them." The shoot was a nightmare of micromanagement. Victoria hovered over my shoulder, critiquing every angle, every shadow. But as the sun began to dip lower, painting the living room in deep oranges and reds, her critiques became physical. She wasn't just adjusting the pillows or the vases. She was adjusting me. She'd step into my personal space to check the viewfinder, her body brushing against my arm, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and electric tension in her wake. "You're too stiff," she murmured, her hand lingering on my shoulder a second too long after correcting my posture. "You need to feel the flow of the room, not just document it." I tried to focus on the aperture settings, but my hands were sweating. We were in a fishbowl. Outside, a crew of landscapers was frantically finishing up the hedges for tomorrow's showing. They were everywhere, men in neon vests walking past the giant glass walls with leaf blowers, glancing inside every few seconds. I felt exposed, like an animal in a zoo, and the constant visual intrusion of the workers added a layer of paranoia to the already charged atmosphere. Every time a worker walked by, I flinched, but Victoria just stared them down until they looked away. She thrived on the attention. She liked being watched. We moved to the upper level as the light turned violet. The master suite was the crown jewel of the house, a massive room with a bed that looked like a floating island and a view that stretched to the horizon. The landscapers had packed up their equipment and were heading to their trucks, but the feeling of being observed lingered. I set up my tripod at the foot of the bed, trying to frame the shot to include the ensuite bathroom's marble archway. Victoria walked to the window, watching the last of the workers leave. She stood there in silhouette, a powerful, untouchable figure. Then, she turned to me. "The privacy in this room is a major selling point," she said, her voice dropping to a lower, huskier register. "But buyers need to see how it feels when the world is shut out." She walked over to the wall panel and pressed a button. The electronic blinds began their slow descent, erasing the view, the landscapers, and the safety of the outside world. I should have kept shooting. I should have asked her to stop. But I stood frozen as the room plunged into a heavy, artificial twilight, illuminated only by the soft, recessed mood lighting. Victoria walked past my camera, ignoring the lens completely. She went to the door, the only exit, and I heard the distinct, heavy click of the lock engaging. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Victoria, the lighting is gone," I stammered, gripping the tripod for stability. "I can't get the shot like this." She turned around slowly, her eyes dark and focused, stripping me of every defense I had. She wasn't looking at the room anymore. She was looking at me like I was a property she had just decided to acquire. She walked over to the massive, pristine bed, sat on the edge, and patted the silk duvet beside her. "The lighting is useless now, Jason," she said, kicking off her heels and looking directly into my soul. "Put the camera down. The Sterlings claim this is the most comfortable bed in the city. I need a second opinion. Let's test the mattress." The silence that filled the master suite after the heavy blinds clicked into place was thick enough to choke on. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary. It was the pressurized, artificial silence of a vault where something valuable, or illegal, was about to happen. I stood there, clutching my camera strap like a lifeline, looking at Victoria sitting on the edge of that massive, pristine bed. She wasn't just my employer in that moment. She was the architect of a situation I had no idea how to navigate. The air conditioning hummed a low, expensive note, pumping chilled air into the room that smelled of lavender detergent and Victoria's sharp, spicy perfume. My brain was screaming at me to unlock the door, to make a joke about the lighting, to diffuse the tension that was rapidly sucking the oxygen out of the room. But my body betrayed me. The sheer audacity of her invitation, "Let's test the mattress," had short-circuited my professional defenses. I wasn't Jason the photographer anymore. I was a broke 24-year-old guy standing in a $10 million bedroom with a woman who looked at me the way a shark looks at a seal that's wandered too far from the shore. I slowly set the camera down on the velvet ottoman at the foot of the bed. It felt like surrendering a weapon. "Come here, Jason," she said, not as a question, but as a directive issued from the boardroom. "You can't sell a lifestyle you haven't experienced." I walked toward her, my boots sinking into the deep pile of the custom rug. When I reached the edge of the bed, she didn't wait. She reached out, grabbed my belt loop, and pulled. I stumbled forward, my knees hitting the mattress, and the loss of balance sent me tipping toward her. She caught me, her hands firm on my shoulders, guiding me down until I was sitting beside her. The mattress was incredible, firm yet yielding, a cloud of memory foam and silk that cost more than my entire college tuition. But I couldn't appreciate the thread count. All I could feel was the heat radiating from Victoria's leg pressed against mine. She leaned back, pulling me with her, until we were both reclining against the mountain of decorative pillows. We were lying in the Sterling's bed. The realization hit me with a jolt of taboo thrill. These weren't staging props. People slept here. A husband and wife lived here. And now, the real estate agent and the photographer were desecrating their sanctuary. Victoria turned to face me, propping herself up on one elbow. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for hesitation, and finding only a terrified fascination. "You're trembling," she whispered, her voice dropping to a husky purr that vibrated through the small space between us. She reached out and touched the collar of my shirt, her fingers brushing the skin of my neck. "Is it the house? Or is it me?" She didn't wait for an answer. She began to unbutton the top button of my shirt, her movements slow and deliberate. "This room is about intimacy, Jason. It's about shedding the day. When I bring a client in here, I need to tell them that this is where they can be their true selves." She undid the second button. "So show me. Who are you when the camera is off?" The professional facade had completely evaporated. This was a test, but I didn't know the grading criteria. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her waist. The fabric of her suit was smooth, cool to the touch, but the skin beneath it was burning. I was crossing a line that could get me blacklisted from every agency in the city, but the adrenaline was a drug I couldn't resist. I leaned in, and the smell of her, expensive cosmetics and raw desire, filled my senses. We weren't kissing, not yet. We were hovering in that electric space before contact, breathing each other's air. My hand moved up her back, feeling the tension in her muscles. She let out a soft sigh and pressed closer, her knee sliding between my legs, effectively pinning me to the mattress. It was a power move. She was on top, in control, dictating the pace. On the nightstand next to us, a framed black and white photo of the Sterling family, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, and a golden retriever, seemed to stare directly at us. Minutes ago, it was just a piece of decor, a prop to sell the happy family narrative. Now, it felt like a silent judge, a witness to the theft we were committing. Victoria followed my gaze to the photo. She didn't look guilty. She reached out with a languid hand and turned the photo face down on the marble surface. "Don't worry about them," she murmured, turning back to me with a hungry glint in her eyes. "They don't know how to use this room properly. We do." She pushed me back against the pillows, her weight settling over me, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Her lips brushed my jawline, sending shivers down my spine, and her hand moved lower, dangerously close to the belt she had grabbed earlier. I was ready to risk it all. The job, the reputation, everything, for this woman who treated me like a secret she couldn't wait to unwrap. But the house had other plans. Just as her hand found the buckle of my belt, a soft, melodic chime echoed through the ceiling speakers of the smart home system, shattering the mood instantly. It was followed by a polite, robotic voice that sounded like a death sentence. Vehicle detected at main gate. License plate recognized. Sterling 1. Victoria froze. Her hand stopped moving. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath the perfect makeup. We both scrambled upright, breathless and disheveled. Through the small gap between the blackout blind and the window frame, a piercing beam of white light swept across the darkened ceiling of the bedroom. Headlights. They were sweeping up the driveway. The Sterlings, Victoria hissed, the seduction replaced by sheer, cold panic. She scrambled off the bed, smoothing her skirt with frantic hands. They're not supposed to be back until Monday. They're early. We heard the heavy mechanical whir of the garage door opening directly beneath us, vibrating through the floorboards. Then, the sound of a car door slamming. A man's voice, muffled but angry, drifted up from the driveway. I told you I left the contracts in the study, Linda. I need to get them now. They weren't just dropping by. They were coming inside. And we were locked in their master bedroom with the lights off and the bed messed up. Victoria looked at me, then at the only door, her eyes wide with a realization that terrified me more than the husband downstairs. Jason, she whispered. My key is still in the lockbox outside. We're trapped. The panic that exploded in the master suite was instantaneous and absolute, shattering the seductive haze like a hammer through a pane of glass. Victoria, the woman who moments ago had been the epitome of predatory grace, was now a blur of frantic motion. She scrambled off the bed, her heels snagging on the expensive rug, and practically threw herself at the duvet, desperately trying to smooth out the indentations our bodies had made. Get the tripod, she hissed, her voice trembling with a raw terror that made my own blood run cold. Get the gear into the bathroom. Now! I grabbed my camera and the tripod, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the lens cap. The sound of the garage door grinding shut beneath us felt like the lid of a coffin closing. We were trapped in a glass box on a cliff, and the owners were walking through the front door. We couldn't go out the bedroom door because the staircase landed right in the foyer where they were standing. Our only option was to retreat further into the trap. We sprinted into the massive en-suite bathroom, just as the heavy thud of the front door closing echoed up the stairwell, followed by the distinct, angry voice of Mr. Sterling. I don't care what the agent said, Linda. The staging looks cheap. I'm going up to check the master before I call her. We backed into the bathroom, a cavernous space of white marble and frosted glass that felt more like a mausoleum than a place to wash. Victoria pulled the heavy sliding pocket door shut, leaving it cracked just an inch so we could hear, but not lock it. Locking it would be a dead giveaway. We were cornered. The bathroom had no exit, just a small window that looked out over a sheer drop to the ocean. I stood there, clutching my camera bag to my chest, listening to the heavy footsteps ascending the floating wooden staircase. Thump, thump, thump. Every step was a countdown to the end of my career, and likely, a lawsuit. Victoria was pressed up against the marble vanity, breathing hard, checking her reflection in the mirror. She looked disheveled. Her blouse was slightly askew, her lipstick smudged. She grabbed a towel and frantically wiped her mouth, then turned to me. The look in her eyes wasn't just fear. It was a wild, electric mix of adrenaline and complicity. She reached out and buttoned the top of my shirt, her fingers brushing my throat. If they find us, she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned. You were measuring the light in the shower. I was supervising. Do not deviate. You are the professional. Be the professional. It was a command, but her hand lingered on my chest, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. In that moment, the symbol of her authority, the way she dressed and commanded the room, shifted. She wasn't my boss anymore. She was my partner in crime. We were bound together by the lie we were about to tell. The footsteps stopped right outside the master suite. The handle of the bedroom door rattled violently. Locked? Mr. Sterling's voice was muffled but clearly annoyed. Why the hell is the bedroom door locked? Linda, did you lock this? My lungs seized up. I looked at Victoria. She closed her eyes for a split second, composing herself, summoning the mask of the high-powered agent. Then, she leaned toward the crack in the pocket door and called out, her voice projecting a fake, cheerful professionalism that was terrifyingly convincing. "Mr. Sterling? Is that you? It's Victoria. I'm in here." There was a pause on the other side of the door, a heavy silence that stretched for an eternity. "Victoria?" Mr. Sterling asked, his tone suspicious. "Why is the door locked? We're supposed to be showing this house tomorrow, not turning it into a fortress." Victoria laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't match the death grip she had on the marble counter. "I'm so sorry. I was just checking the automated blinds and the lock mechanism for the security audit. I didn't want the wind to slam it shut. Give me 1 second, I'm just finishing up in the en-suite." I watched her lie with a mixture of awe and horror. She was buying us seconds, but she couldn't buy us an exit. I looked around the bathroom frantically. There was nowhere to hide. The vanity was floating, no cabinets underneath. The toilet was in a glass cubicle. The only thing that offered cover was the massive walk-in shower, a slab of rainforest granite behind a wall of frosted glass. It was translucent, not opaque. If someone looked closely, they would see a shape. "I have the master key, Victoria," Mr. Sterling grumbled from the hallway, the sound of metal jingling against metal sending a spike of pure panic through my nervous system. "Don't bother unlocking it. I need to get in there to get my files from the safe." He wasn't waiting. He was coming in. The sound of the keys sliding into the bedroom lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Victoria's eyes snapped open. She grabbed my arm and shoved me hard toward the shower. "Get in," she mouthed, her face pale. "Don't move. Don't breathe." It was a choice with a terrifying price. If I hid, I was admitting guilt. If I was found in the shower, there was no measuring light excuse that would save me. I was just the creep hiding in the bathroom with the agent. But I didn't argue. I stepped into the massive shower stall and pulled the heavy glass door shut just as the bedroom lock clicked open. I pressed my back against the cold, wet tile, clutching my camera, praying the frost on the glass was thick enough to hide me. Through the haze of the glass, I saw the bedroom door swing open. I saw the blurry silhouette of Mr. Sterling stomp into the room, followed by his wife. And I saw Victoria step out of the bathroom to intercept them, blocking the view of the shower with her own body. "Mr. Sterling, what a surprise!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching up. I was trapped in a glass cage, inches away from exposure, watching the blurry figures of the people who could ruin my life, knowing that my only shield was the woman who had dragged me into this mess. I was a ghost trapped behind a wall of frosted glass, a silent observer in a terrifying play where the only audience was my own racing heart. The shower stall was a hermetically sealed box of humidity and fear, and I was pressed so tightly against the cold tile wall that I could feel the grout lines digging into my skin. Through the translucent haze of the glass, Mrs. Sterling was a blurry, terrifying silhouette. She was standing at the vanity, less than 3 feet away, humming a tune that sounded jarringly cheerful against the backdrop of my impending doom. I watched, paralyzed, as she leaned over the sink, adjusting her makeup. Every movement she made sent a ripple of panic through me. If she decided to check the water pressure, if she opened the door to inspect the tiling, if she saw the shadow of my camera bag which I was clutching to my chest like a bomb, it was over. The steam from my own breath was starting to fog up the inside of the glass, threatening to turn my hiding spot into a beacon. I held my breath until my lungs burned, terrified that the sound of an exhale would shatter the fragile illusion that the bathroom was empty. The situation spiraled from dangerous to critical in the span of a heartbeat. Through the glass, I saw Mrs. Sterling's silhouette jerk suddenly. "Oh, damn it," she muttered, her voice echoing off the marble walls. I heard the distinct tink-tink-tink of a piece of jewelry hitting the stone floor and rolling. It rolled toward the shower. My stomach dropped into my boots. I watched the blurry shape of the woman bend down, her hand reaching out, sweeping across the floorboards. She was getting closer. Her fingers were inches from the gap under the glass door. If she looked up, just a fraction of an inch, she would see my boots. She would see me. In that second, my pocket vibrated violently against my thigh. It was my phone. The screen lit up in the darkness of the shower, casting a faint blue glow on the tile. I looked down. It was my landlord, calling about the rent I was 2 weeks late on. It was the call I had been dreading all month, the call that represented the crumbling reality of my life outside this mansion. But in that moment, I didn't care about the apartment or the eviction notice. I reached into my pocket with a shaking hand and slid the power button off, killing the connection, killing my lifeline. I chose the darkness. I chose the risk. I silenced the world to protect the woman standing on the other side of the door. Just as Mrs. Sterling's hand touched the metal track of the shower door, Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Linda! Don't touch the floor!" She rushed into the bathroom, her heels clicking rapidly on the stone. "The cleaning crew used a chemical solvent on the grout an hour ago. It hasn't set yet. It will ruin your manicure." It was a lie, a brilliant, desperate lie, but it stopped Mrs. Sterling cold. She snatched her hand back and stood up. "Good Lord, Victoria, you could have put up a sign," she snapped, wiping her hands on a pristine white towel. Victoria laughed, but it sounded brittle. "I'm sorry. Let's get you out of here. The fumes can be dizzying. Besides, Walter is asking about the kitchen island." She effectively herded the woman out of the room, using her body as a shield, her eyes darting once to the shower door with a look of sheer desperation. I listened as their voices faded down the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of the bedroom door closing. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. I waited 10 seconds, counting my heartbeats, before I pushed the shower door open. I stumbled out onto the bath mat, gasping for air as if I had been underwater. The room was empty, but the scent of Victoria's perfume lingered, mixed with the metallic smell of adrenaline. The bedroom door opened again, softly this time. Victoria slipped back inside, locking it behind her. She didn't look like the ironclad agent anymore. She slumped against the doorframe, her perfect posture collapsing. She looked at me, and then down at her hands, which were trembling. "They act like they own the world," she whispered, her voice cracking with a raw bitterness I hadn't seen before. "He buys these houses to park his money, and she decorates them to fill the silence. And I'm just part of the staging. Just another pretty object to help them close the deal." She looked up at me, her eyes wet and unguarded. "I didn't bring you here to test the mattress, Jason. I brought you here because for 20 minutes, I wanted to be something other than an asset. I wanted to be seen." It was a confession that shifted the ground beneath us. She wasn't just using me. She was as trapped in this glass box as I was. But we didn't have time for sympathy. "You have to go," she said, pushing off the door and walking toward the window above the bathtub. "The front door is blocked. You have to take the cliff path." She cranked the window open. The cold ocean wind rushed in, smelling of salt and freedom. I climbed onto the marble ledge, my camera bag slung over my shoulder. It was a 10-foot drop to the garden terrace below. "Victoria," I said, pausing with one leg out the window. "What about the commission? What about the job?" She looked at me, her silhouette framed by the amber light of the hallway behind her. "Forget the job," she said softly. "Just don't forget me." I dropped. I hit the grass hard, rolling to absorb the impact, damp earth staining my jeans. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted toward the side gate, staying low behind the manicured hedges. I was halfway to the perimeter when a floodlight snapped on, blinding me. "Hey! You there!" a voice shouted from the upper balcony. It was Mr. Sterling. He had walked out onto the deck. I didn't stop to look. I scrambled over the side fence, tearing my shirt on the trellis, and landed on the public access path below. I ran until my lungs burned, until I reached my car parked 3 blocks down in the shadows. I threw my gear into the back seat and collapsed into the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably. I jammed the keys into the ignition, ready to flee, to put this insanity behind me. But as I reached for the gear shift, my headlights swept across the street and landed on a silver Porsche Cayenne blocking my exit. The window rolled down slowly. Victoria was sitting there, calm, composed, and waiting. The blinding white beams of the Porsche's headlights cut through the darkness of the quiet suburban street, pinning me to the driver's seat of my beat-up sedan like an insect trapped in amber. My heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the adrenaline from the cliff jump and the sprint through the neighborhood coursing through my veins like liquid fire. I sat there for a frozen eternity, gripping the steering wheel with muddy hands, waiting for the police sirens, for Mr. Sterling to come running down the hill, or for Victoria to step out and scream at me for ruining her commission. But the street remained silent. The passenger window of the Porsche rolled down with a smooth, electric hum. Victoria didn't get out. She just sat there, bathed in the soft blue glow of the dashboard lights, looking terrifyingly composed. She wasn't the disheveled woman who had whispered confessions to me in the bathroom. She was the Ice Queen again, the untouchable agent who moved pieces on a board I barely understood. I hesitated, then slowly rolled down my own window, bracing myself for the impact of her anger. "You run fast for a photographer," she said, her voice cutting through the cool night air, devoid of any panic. She reached across the passenger seat and held out a thick, manila envelope through the open window. It was heavy. I stared at it, confused. "The Sterlings are furious," she continued, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "They think a raccoon set off the perimeter alarm. I managed to convince them the locked bedroom door was a malfunction of the smart home system. I sold the lie, Jason. Just like I sell everything else." I reached out and took the envelope. It felt warm from the car's heater. Inside, I could feel the distinct, dense texture of cash, far more than the freelance fee we had agreed upon. "Hazard pay," she added, catching my look. "And a down payment on your discretion. If anyone asks, you were never there tonight. The photos don't exist. The golden hour never happened." This was the off-ramp. I could take the money, drive away, pay my rent, and never answer her calls again. It was the safe choice, the rational choice. But as I looked at her, I saw a crack in the porcelain mask. Her hand was resting on the gear shift, and her fingers were tapping a nervous, erratic rhythm that betrayed the calm facade. She hadn't come here just to pay me off. She had chased me down because the adrenaline that was burning me up was consuming her too. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice rough, holding the envelope tight. "I just disappear." Victoria smirked, a dangerous expression that made her look 10 years younger. She leaned closer to the window, lowering her voice so the darkness seemed to lean in with her. "I have a new listing going live on Friday. It's a penthouse in the financial district. 52nd floor. The owner is in Tokyo for the month, and the security code is—" She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. "1-9-8-4. I need someone to test the acoustics. Meet me there at 7. Unless, of course, the drop was too steep for you." She didn't wait for an answer. The window rolled up, sealing her back inside her luxury bubble. The Porsche reversed with a growl of the engine and sped off into the night, leaving only the smell of burnt rubber and expensive perfume lingering in the air. I sat alone in the dark, the envelope heavy in my lap. I opened it. Inside was $5,000 in crisp hundreds. Enough to fix my car, pay my landlord, and buy a new lens. But underneath the cash, there was a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture she must have taken on her phone and printed instantly. A blurry, angled selfie of us in the reflection of the bathroom mirror, just moments before the Sterlings walked in. In the photo, I looked terrified, but she looked alive, her eyes blazing with a wild, reckless joy. I drove home that night not as a victim of circumstance, but as a willing participant. I didn't pay the landlord the next morning. I bought a new suit. 1 week later, the elevator to the 52nd floor of the Millennium Tower opened with a silent whoosh. The penthouse was a cavernous space of concrete and glass, floating above the city lights like a spaceship. It was empty, echoing, and utterly magnificent. I walked to the edge of the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city that looked like a circuit board from this height. The door code had worked perfectly. I wasn't the photographer anymore. I was the secret owner of this space for the night. At 7:05 p.m., the heavy steel front door opened. I didn't turn around. I heard the click of heels on the polished concrete floor, slow and deliberate. "The acoustics are excellent." Victoria's voice echoed through the empty room, bouncing off the glass walls. I turned to face her. She was holding a bottle of wine and a set of master keys. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We had created a ritual out of the risk, a sanctuary in the spaces that belonged to everyone and no one. She walked toward me, dropping the keys into my hand, cold metal against warm skin, and I knew that the house on the cliff was just the prologue.